I did this chart and there was very bad sound because since I had one of Bill Gates' delightful updates, the sound on this program doesn't work as it used to, so I have to use that thing. Lovely. Thanks, Bill. But anyway, I wanted to look at it again just because with the developments that we've had, because of the sanctions on Russia, and Russia have now been developing different systems. So they've been moving to make an arrangement with the Indian government so that they have a ruble-rupee exchange. Since they've been kicked off of SWIFT, they've joined China's mechanism. And apparently now they're saying that in order to sell oil and gas, they're going to sell them in rubles, which has in effect made the ruble now a reserve currency, right? So there is a huge threat now to the hegemony that America had because of the dollar being the reserve currency. And it's all sort of come about simply because of sanctions on Russia. So it's almost been a shooting in the foot kind of thing, which again makes us question, is this whole so-called war in Ukraine, is it advancing the New World Order agenda? Because we have Larry Fink coming out and saying, oh, this is bad for globalism because China and Russia are establishing kind of their own New World Order. But wasn't always the plan to transfer everything over to China, to make China the new superpower, and then for the elites to move their focus over in China and then project the whole social score out from there and to project the whole Chinese system onto the rest of us? So that was kind of incubating all this time, waiting for the moment when they would explode it onto the world scene. And what they really need is to collapse the dollar, to destroy a strong America so that we don't have this competition between America and China, and to collapse the West because they can't redistribute wealth by making the whole of Africa and whatever more wealthy. They wouldn't want that because they want so much money for themselves. So it's easier for them to collapse us down to that level, making everyone so much easier to control. So again, there are these questions. Is Putin, is he being tricked? Is he being encouraged? Because what he is doing is actually promoting the wider agenda, which is the downfall of the West, the downfall of the dollar, the big power shift east. So I think it's useful once more to look at the Nixon shock chart. So this is the chart where Nixon came out and said that the dollar, which was at that stage the world's reserve currency, was no longer going to be tied to gold. It's quite interesting that the ascendant for this chart, it was the 15th of August 1971, and the time was 9 p.m. in Washington, D.C. It's very interesting that the chart has a Pisces ascendant, because Pisces is so can be nebulous, lack of boundaries, lack of borders, and the ruler, Neptune, is conjunct Jupiter, Jupiter being in Scorpio. Jupiter in Scorpio is explosive, things go wild, and what has happened since the dollar was decoupled from gold? Inflation. So for me, a Pisces ascendant with a ruler conjunct Jupiter in Scorpio says an absolute explosion of fiat currency, of money printing, things going out of control, skyrocketing inflation. Everything about that says to me a lack of control, which is exactly what we have. Interestingly, it was formed at the time of a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, and you know I've banged on about the fact that right now, pretty much in the next few days, we are having a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, albeit in Pisces, not in Sagittarius, but still, I've long said to you, will this be the time at which we sort of switch over to digital currency and when the dollar will fail? And well, we see it is happening simply because one of the outcomes of the sanctions and Putin's actions in Ukraine has been the fact that, you know, what he's doing with the ruble. And the ruble now is at its highest level against the dollar in many, many decades, if not ever, simply because now in order to, you know, buy Russian goods, which most of the world are, the whole of South America, the whole of Africa, the whole of the Arab and Muslim world, the whole of the Asian continent, they're all still dealing with Russia. You know, Western Europe and the US, Canada, and maybe Australia and Japan, it's a very small proportion now of the world economy because, of course, China and India are such powerhouses and such massive populations. So really, they are hurting themselves more than hurting anyone else. But let's just go on here to go back to the chart. Now, one of the absolute fundamentals of the fiat currency, that it sort of comes with it, like, you know, love and marriage and a horse and carriage. Fiat currency goes with war. I did explain why in my other video with reference to an excellent article. Unfortunately, the sound was bull. The sound was terrible on that, so it ruined the whole thing. But it explains why with fiat currency you're always going to have war. Simply because you don't have to worry. You can just print as much as you like and send people off to war. And of course, with the dollar as the world reserve currency, you export the inflation. So fiat currency equals war. And what do we have here? Two major planets in the house of war, Pluto and Uranus, right? We also have a lot of planets in the house of the army and the armed service and the military-industrial complex. So I feel that fiat currency also serves the military-industrial complex very, very well. Okay, so we've talked about inflation inherent in this, lack of control inherent in this, war being a part of it. Look what we have, Mars conjunct the North Node in the 12th house. Also, big signs there of war, stealth, the fact that there's an awful lot of secrecy involved in fiat currency, what it's really about, who controls it, the fact that the Federal Reserve's owned by the Rothschilds, it's private. For every $5 they print, they create more debt than money with ever which to pay the debt. This is not, I studied economics at two different universities. They don't teach you that. They never really tell you the truth about money. And so money equals debt. And when anyone tries to move away, like Abraham Lincoln with the greenback, JFK talking about, creating another currency. I think Hitler did by creating this sort of coupons for work and that sort of thing. HF Verwoerd in South Africa tried it. Everyone winds up dead. Even Tsar Nicholas, I think, there was one Tsar who also wanted to try to move away from fiat currency. They all wound up dead because all roads lead back to the Federal Reserves, Bank of International Settlements, who are owned by the cabal. And namely, the Rothschilds pretty much in control of that. And without that, they can't exercise control. So that's where the stealth, the deceit, everything lies there. Just let's look at transits because let's first look at transits, should I say, because as you can see, there's a lot going on. There's Venus conjunct the Sun in Leo, opposite Mars conjunct the North Node in Aquarius, and we know Saturn has been triggering conjunct that point. Saturn will be moving back to conjunct that because it's retrograde now, and it'll be moving forward again, and Uranus in Taurus will be moving to square this whole system. So again, this indicates a lot is going to be happening, particularly October, November. I keep mentioning those dates because at that stage, Uranus is triggering an awful lot in the charts of Russia and many other charts, including this one. So Uranus will be squaring that, and so will Saturn will be opposing it come October, November. So a lot of stress on this position. Very interesting. Also, let's look at the arcs. Solar arc Uranus is a conjunct this particularly important one because it's the chart ruler, indicating sudden and radical change. So this thing will fall apart very suddenly, I think. Uranus does natally rule the 12th house of endings, of demise. So very interesting that solar arc Uranus is triggering that conjunction, which also rules Jupiter ruling the midheaven, the direction. So a total change in direction in terms of the dollar hegemony, all that. We also see here solar arc Sun and Neptune are triggering Uranus here in the 7th house, the house of war. Of course, war with Russia is pivotal in unraveling this whole system, and maybe a big shift to the yuan or to power and control in the BRICS countries, who are potentially all going to be using a new currency along with the Arab world. Arab world have wanted to move away for a long time. Saddam, Gaddafi, Assad, etc., etc. We also have here solar arc Moon moving to trigger this whole thing. Moon is opposite Mars right now, so the solar arc Moon will be triggering that whole opposition, again involving the 12th house, also Venus. Well, Venus slightly involved with the 8th house, but also the 7th house of war. So awful lot going on there. And as you can see, solar arc Pluto, which is in Scorpio, is at about 18 degrees. It's also triggering this whole thing. So the Moon and Pluto are sort of triggering this natal opposition, which seems to me to contain a lot of fate and karma because of the influence of the node. So all that inflation will be heading back to America. All the kind of provoking of wars in order to keep this going is finally going to lead to its demise. But just the big question, is its demise by design? Because it might be, we have to consider the possibility that the elites are now ensconced in China, and the demise of the dollar, and therefore the demise of America as a power, could be exactly what they want. The demise of Western Europe as they shift to a new power base. They've always moved their power. It's gone from Babylon, it went into Rome, Khazaria, Antwerp, northern Italy, and Genoa into London, then across to America. So they like to move things around. How successful it will be, the shift to China, one could only wonder. I always say at the end of the day, there's going to be trouble at the top. The best laid plans will fail. God frustrates the plans of the wicked. Too many people are awake now. I'm not sure if this can totally be stopped. In many ways, maybe the end of the dollar as the reserve currency and everything that is entailed is a good thing. But for those of us who live in the West, we wonder what comes next, because we're not particularly keen on the rollout of the Chinese social score, the lack of human rights that entails and everything about that, whereas, it would absolutely suit the elites. So let's see what happens.